the trumpet, you know, is usually higher, faster. And so that night he said, that's the sound. That's the sound. Huh. And sometimes, you know, it really hits when you don't expect it to. And sometimes, you know, it really hits when bad things happen. Okay. Yeah, this was, you know, because I'm a basketball fan, you know, right now, last night, big is better. That's why I don't like the Lakers. You know, you got two big guys and they're really good. And it was a great basketball game, but, you know, it was a great game, but the Lakers won, you know, so I was going, ah. But when the Warriors started to get really good, you know, basically basketball, you got a center. You've got two forwards, a strong forward and a wing forward. You know, the wing forward moves around and shoots. You know, the big, strong forward rebounds and does the dirty work inside and is supposed to do some things too. Then you get your two guards. And the Warriors had traded for this guy who was an all-star named David Lee. And then coming out of camp, he got hurt. And so they had this other guy who was really too small, supposedly, you know, to be a power forward of 4, you know, 1 point guard, 2 shooting guard, 3 wing small forward, 4 power forward, 5 center, and named Draymond Green. And so, I mean, okay, he was a backup, but he was considered too small. Well, the Warriors started out 21-3 that year. And David Lee comes back. And the coach says, well, you know, this is working. So all of a sudden, instead of being an all-star and being somebody who was a starter, all of a sudden he's on the bench, where Green was. Because Green, when you added him in, changed everything. It was like Glenn Miller's sound. And that was kind of, I mean, they already had Curry and, you know, a lot of the other pieces, but all of a sudden you put this undersized guy in the power forward situation. And what happened is he was just so unique that nobody knew what to do. In fact, what happened after that was everybody started to look for that model. Okay, so, you know, whether it's a Glenn Miller story with the sound, or it's the Warriors with Draymond Green. Both of those happened because of bad circumstances. And we are looking at, of course, a very difficult time, you know, with the pandemic and whatever else is going on right now, upcoming elections, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a lot of political turmoil. It's just a mess. And I guess one thing is what happens? Well, when you take something really bad or a setback, whether it's David Lee's injury that led to Draymond Green being an all-star, or, you know, whether it's Glenn Miller's trumpet or lead trumpeter splitting his lip, and then you had to kind of rearrange all the pieces a bit to accommodate the woodwinds and whatever, trombone. Then what happens is that it's alchemy. There's chemistry. And talking from somebody who almost blew up his organic chem lab. You know, I didn't do it, but I was that close, okay? There's chemistry. You don't do this and that. You don't put this in water. That's pretty exacting, okay? But then there's alchemy. And alchemy oftentimes happens when things aren't good. So we're kind of looking right now at the world, and we're looking at Aikido's place in it. And this is the great time for us to find some alchemy. So kind of within that, sometimes if we go into something, something dead end, total disaster happening, and then somehow something new comes out of that that's vital, that gets energy moving in a much healthier, much better direction. And, I was watching the game last night, and, the Warriors aren't in it. And unfortunately, I kind of wanted Denver to win, but they have this guy, I think he's Serbian, Nikola Jokic. And that guy is totally fun to watch. And what's interesting is even though he's much bigger, he's much younger, he's kind of the Draymond Green archetype. He plays center, not power forward. Draymond's, unfortunately, his shooting is kind of gone like that. But he was a better shooter once. But Draymond's a great passer. Draymond orchestrates most of the rest of the team. Draymond is a decision maker. And Jokic, his passion is incredible. I mean, if you kind of watch, for example, you watch LeBron, that's the obvious chemical. Okay, we're going to form a corporation, and we have this product, and we're going to cram it down everybody's throat, and they can't stop us. That's LeBron. And yeah, he's got a lot of good stuff. But for me, he's not fun. Jokic is fun. I mean, just the feel he has. He's, in a lot of ways, if you were to look at them, they're both unique players, Nikola Jokic, Draymond Green. Jokic was the second round pick. There was another European player who was the first round pick. Well, they traded that guy away. He kept a second rounder, which was Jokic. And Jokic has that ability, he's behind, boom, he knows somebody's there. His passing angles are incredible. And so, something that's very atypical. A lot of times you don't want your best ball handler, passer, to be a power forward, as in Draymond, although Draymond can play center. Okay? Or conversely, you have the center position, but you have somebody who can shoot threes. You have somebody who really has a very fun game to watch. And mostly, I've kind of been a Warrior fan, so we played the Nuggets and Jokic. But since there are no Warriors around and they're playing the Lakers, I kind of been watching the Nuggets and going, wow. And so sometimes that happens. Beyond chemistry is alchemy. And we're at a time right now where we have the potential to touch the alchemy. Because chemistry looks bad, but opportunity. Something bad happens. Everything's stacked against you. Alchemy. Okay? So within that, it's not, this is not meant to be a pep talk. But a lot of times you find that, when you're just running into a wall, or the wall seems to be chasing you. There's a potential. Don Juan called it the cubic centimeter of chance. When all this is going on, and that's a little bit what Jokic's passes were like. I've never seen a big guy be able to just read the floor and just have such a sense for things. He almost won the game. And you give the Lakers credit; they got more star power than Denver. That's the cruel thing in the area, in the world. Is chemistry generally beats alchemy. But what happens is alchemy creates the next chemistry. So the alchemy for me is more like what you might call the magical element. And Aikido has its chemistry, has its technique, its form, its traditions. That's the chemistry of it. Well, Sensei understood chemistry, but he was into alchemy. So, that's just a little food for thought. So we're going to go into the other room, and let's do that now. Here we go. Are we better screen? What about that? Okay. So, a lot of times we let the circumstances create us. Things are pushing or chaotic. So what would allow alchemy to happen? Because things will happen. The world will change. The world will be the world. So I think a lot of alchemy comes from, we all go through our, why is this happening? Why is this happening to me? Why is the wall chasing me so I keep running into it? But you're kind of easy there. And sometimes it's hard to see the setback as actually a gift. That's you're easy with it. And that may take some practice. Because I kind of learned to kind of settle and, I can be like that. And it's a little bit like Nikola Jokic's passing angles. Anybody can throw a pass from A to B. But when you have basically basketball is four-dimensional chess played with super athletes as pieces. So at that speed, just be able to kind of go that way, or to see the timing, because everything, the movement of the pieces has to coordinate with a certain window in space-time. Boom. Who else can do that? Is Stephen Curry. He plays another position. He's supposed to handle the ball. Okay? But so there's a situation, and oftentimes the situation creates a limited version of me. I complain. Yes, I do. I criticize. Yes, I do. I judge. Yes, I do. I get into lower emotional states like anger and I get pretty weird, as most people can in this current pandemic situation. But instead, to be easy with it, not neglectful, not overly optimistic, just easy. And sometimes there are solutions we don't see because we're too caught up in letting the world create us. And, the way Don Juan put it, there's a cubic centimeter of chance somewhere. So how can we find that? So that you have to be perpetually fluid. If you lock in judgment or fear, you keep hitting that wall, the wall starts to chase you. So be very easy with it. Yeah. Maybe if I don't fight the wall will get a little tired of me just being easy. And so all of a sudden, angles open up. Things I don't see. Okay? Now, for example, this. Balls. as it's falling, if we catch it, and all of a sudden we have the beginning of the movement. Oh, I dropped it. Well, no, but maybe. Maybe there are patterns here that I don't see because I'm too caught up in. And I try to do a fancy move, drop a stick. But then I start to notice, for example, if I'm too tense, but I'm in a particular state. Boom, drop it. It's an alive drop. All right, which means that even though I dropped it, I'm coming from an easiness. Right? And for example, this sort of motion kind of comes out from, well, guess what? I want to go that way. No, I should have gone that way. But what if we say, well, we can look at that and that? If I look at that and that, maybe I'll see this and this. And so that easiness, so what becomes confusion or disappointment or disillusionment or something, all of a sudden you see opportunity. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom. Boom, boom. And there's a chemistry. You understand that motion, that motion, that motion, that motion. That motion, boom, 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 boom. If I'm not too caught up in the chemistry, maybe I begin to see how, oh, boom, oh, boom, 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 boom. So what was I dropping? What if we just really want the thing to just drop in these patterns, and maybe they'll drop in these patterns if we. Then new discoveries come out. And there's a sense where this system, which is me, mind, body, spirit, whatever, is revitalized. And so, what we're really looking at is the chemistry that we've created the world out of. All of a sudden there's climate change. Fire on the West Coast, flooding on the East Coast. Fire and water are not supposed to destroy us. Fire and water are two forces that are supposed to boom, boom, work together. Boom, 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 boom. Okay? So, in some sense, those powerful forces, unless we realize that they're meant to be parents together and to create, we feel like we're being hit from two sides. It's like a child, that's got two parents that are arguing all the time, and there's a part that you start to externalize it or internalize it in a bad way, out there, conflict, mother, father. It must be because of me. That's a very common psychological trait. Okay, so you have a mother complex, me have a father complex, da-da-da-da. But if all of a sudden those two parent forces, what happens to the child here? The child feels loved. Child feels loved. Therefore, to some degree, the parents don't just conceive the child. Moment by moment, by their interaction, if it's bickering and back and forth, it's, they're creating a child to be what? What? And so what happens is the children create the parents in a certain way, because if the parents are loving, the child which we all are. We have the archetype of the inner child. Feels love. And the world is kind of wondrous. If the parents are perceived by the child as being bickering, then the world is contentious. And it feels a lot like what the world feels like now. So Sensei talks a lot about misogi. So for example, as I go back a little bit more, as I clear, they get more towards the, all children are kind of born somewhat pure. There's a purity in us, which is very different, for example, than just saying, okay, it's a child. No, it really represents a soul, spirit, a truer version of ourselves. So, as I'm kind of maneuvering here, when the child feels loved, to some degree, the parents are created to be loving. Fire and water, water and fire. They're together with each other. The child feels more loved, exists kind of in a sense of wonder, is free to explore, to be creative. And when the parents out there perceived as being too demanding, you be this, you do that, then all of a sudden, the child, has to kind of try to be what the parents want. And somehow, the actual relationship, I'm not talking just pretty much just your physical parents, but as Sensei said, the one source is your parents. A very cryptic statement there. The original mind and the original body. The designs of the universe, the stuff of the universe, the space-time grid, that all that happens in. And we're kind of part of that original sense. Boom, boom. So the universe, to some degree, represents our parents. And at some point, I think maybe one of our sensei's major tricks, those of the misogi, is we exist in a world, and that world shapes us to be in a very limited sense of who we are. And some of that is it's a dampening effect. If you go like this, so, you're taught to look both ways before you cross the street. You probably should watch what you do in a certain way with common sense. But then that dampening effect is in response to a world out there, which is increasingly, sometimes, contentious. And then we become more guarded. So what was initially a dampener, just to maybe create some safety, all of a sudden becomes a prison. And so, one things I think of Sensei there is, it's okay. There's some vestige in me of the fact that, my real parents are those forces that created the universe. And I'm their child. And there's, as I get back more towards my original innocence, purity, those forces start to become, as they were in the beginning, more loving, more together oriented, as opposed to da, 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 da. And so, as that, I exist in this space. Exist in this space. The child is then free to explore. Should I do this or that? If I'm worried my parents are they want me to do that, but I'd like to do that, then all of a sudden I'm in conflict here. Okay? But if the parents say, look, we trust you, explore this and that. explore this, boom. And, you know, for a young child, the parents are their universe. So if we kind of get enough back towards our original nature, it's not a child, but we exist more in wonder. And certain things we see, and there are things that come together a little different. Okay. And when Sensei was talking about Takemusu Aikido, there's something about a creative process that happens when we kind of get back to our more original state. And you know, he basically said what was the Japanese, Bu no kongen wa kami no ai nari. Okay? The origin, the source of Buddha is what he called kami no ai. Ka, mi, water, fire. Ka, fire, mi, water. Original parents. Kami no ai. That which binds them. That which is the attraction, creating a harmonious interchange, water, fire, fire, water. And in the background is the child, the original nature of us. And as the child goes, there's the developmental process. By the time we get here, we're so polarized and conflicted. But the original nature of those two parent forces coming out of the one, okay? Boom, 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 boom. That child existing in that love, the attraction, magnetism between water to fire and fire to water. Boom. Mom wants me to be that, Dad wants me that. And they may influence me, but I need to be able to find my way with that. That's kind of nice if we're existing in this field, which would be somewhat what it would be. Not just love in a particular way out there, but the field, that attraction is an energy field, that mutuality, water to fire, fire to water. Boom, boom, boom. So as we start to, what happens is, you know, we exist in that sense of wonder. See, my dad wants me to be strong and play football, or my mom wants me to be a great artist. You know, this point where can I be both? Boom, 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 boom. And if the parents are open enough, there are those two forces. And then boom, 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 boom. So if you're watching this and you haven't been, pick something up and begin to move. Pick something up and begin to move. Boom. 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 You don't have to rush it or force it. Any motion can be continued, or that any motion can reverse on itself. There's this track and that track. But the child is free to explore what the father brings and what the mother brings, and will find their own mix or way. And to some degree, you know, we're not talking at this point about physical parents. We're talking about the great parents, that come out of the one source. And when I'm able to, I feel a warmth. They're free to talk to each other. They're free to come together. And if I'm the child of those forces, I'm very flexible, but there's a depth. You know, you're open, and yet boom, there's a sense where boom, boom. You know, you've been encouraged to grow, so you sense the tempo and the rhythm of things, right? So you're doing, you're creating. That's again the alchemy. So the two forces coming together. Creating the child. And as a child goes out, the child begins to create the world. And you have the original blueprint of the original love and creation of the parents' fire, water that came out of the one source. Everything. You're just kind of in that state of wonder. Oh. Boom, 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 boom. You might appreciate the power of nature and also realize, you know, its harmony, its essence, its beauty. Boom. You might acquire a kind of discernment to be able to see and pick apart fine details, scientifically, and yet understand the rhythm and the harmony of the universe and the creation. So fire, water, water, fire in you, because that original relationship you had with the parents, and you know, I remember the very first Superman movie. Marlon Brando is Kal-El's father, and he goes into as a crystal, crystal expands into this fortress for him, and he spends some time, and then at the end of whatever it is, you see him flying out. But one thing that the father tells the son is that the child is really the parent. As much as we exist maybe as an original consciousness, pure, open, existing in the field of love, there are other words to describe it, between the parent forces. That you can say, you know, the child created the parents. That's kind of the great mystery of Aikido. Ever since he talks about the one. Okay? Boom, 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 Okay. So just a couple of things like that, right? If we were to do this in more of a sitting form. There's kind of the out and in of breathing. And when things are this way, the breath starts to go high and it starts to go very rapid, or I start to hold my breath. But in that original place, I mean, fire, water, and there's a child. That's the breath, not the movement of the forces, the parents. We come out of parents. Since they said if you go back enough, your real parents are not your physical parents. So if I can just sort of relax a bit, I make that transition from breathing. And of course you breathe a little deeper, a little fuller. And in increasing stages, the breathing becomes breath. For me, that's when things start to get clearer. Yeah, there's all that confusion in the world. Well, Sensei said, you know, the world's not going well because people hang out with people saying and doing foolish things. So who do I hang out with? Well, it's translated as I hang out with God. He's probably talking about, I hang out with the love that exists between these parent forces. And as I hang out there, I find myself as that original purity. And initially, you might call it the child of those two forces. But it's one of those little flip-flops. You're really good at the breathing, and then there's breath. Breath is both the destination, but it also, the breathing came out of something called breath. So the child becomes the true parent. So since it says, the one source, view the one source as your parents. So again, to me, that's the child, parents, okay? Parents give birth to the child, but there's something about that original purity, the original essence that gave birth to the parents. And that's more for me like breath. Breathing takes you to breath. But breath also may come out of breathing. So things like quiet or calm. I can feel the depth as opposed to, you know, I'm up here. Or conversely, I'm looking for an escape. Why are these things happening? Let me find. Yeah. You get to sit on a magic pool. Filled with crystals. They kind of have a hum to them. They generate light as well as sound. And all of a sudden, everything is enveloped, and it's like all of a sudden that pool's in a magic cave. And all those things are kind of like the nursery that the parents have created for the child. The child would just bask in the wonderment of things. As we get caught up in, you know, okay, father, mother, we get very busy out there. But the more original sense of us. So your breath is a travel vehicle. Takes me to a place that's deeper. Another thing about that, this deeper space envelops. So again, there's that feeling of, it's not an idea. But you start to feel the nurturing effect of that nursery that the forces, the parents have given you. And therefore you feel the parents through that. And there's still all this turmoil going on. And that's a little bit like the parents arguing. Mitch McConnell did this, Trump did that, on and on. But the world's always been that way. And what happens here, I don't want this as an escape. But if I'm a child of the universe, I can begin to handle all of that out there. I intend to vote. And, in my case, it's like, I'm like everybody else. I fall down from here quite a bit. It's like, get into a reaction, spin out, all of a sudden you're kind of caught in the craziness of the world. But it's kind of nice to, Sensei's, his prayer time. Told Nado Sensei, says, I can do all these things, but the day is ruined unless I have my prayer time in the mornings. So it's probably a soaking time. And one of the real tricky things is that, the actual sense of things out there, those forces are bouncing off each other and twisting. And therefore, we're kind of in the twist of that world. And as we kind of unwind, go towards our more original nature, so those forces start to go back more towards their original loving nature. Again, it's Bu no Kongen wa Kami no Ai Nari. The origin of martial arts is Kami no Ai. That love, for me, parents, water, fire, fire, water, that attraction, that field of love that connects them. And there's movement, they move and interact within that. But we're the consciousness, the soul essence, the purity at the beginning of things, for those who were in perfect accord. And some of that you see out there, even though it's very difficult right now, and acts of gratitude, things that inspire you, things that take you back more towards your own true nature. They're still there, but the world's so confused right now unless we sort of take responsibility for it. And we just get caught out there. And because it's a limited level of ourselves, our parents are going back and forth, bickering and fighting, okay? And you basically get the world out there. So one of the things we can do is just begin to take a certain amount of responsibility for that. Because I can't act out there when I'm caught up in it, feeling the pinch of these different energies and conflicts going on. But I know I've got a vote. I know I still have a dojo to run, even though it's online. And a lot of things seem stacked against us. But the answer is not better chemistry. This gives us real chance, because chemistry is bad. But there's the alchemy where we see that, or that. out of that original clarity. And so we begin to be able to navigate that morass out there from our own original true nature. And Banyu Aigono Seishin Nadi, the spirit of loving protection for all. In that original place, fire loving water, water loving fire, the original consciousness as the child, in that field of love, child feels very protected and nurtured. And those forces blend so perfectly together. They're obviously going to protect each other and the child. And the child in that environment is going to grow up, the soul moving in his journey through the creation in a way that it protects what the parents stand for in the world. And so the spirit of loving protection is not something you necessarily get just by putting your gi on and going back and forth with spiritual exercises. It's something that has to be inside you. And it is in everybody. It's just the world is so twisted. And we twist into the world's twist, and we feel that conflict. And yes, we are in a very bad situation. But let's look at the examples I mentioned, the Glenn Miller example, the Golden State Warrior example. And, you know, when the chemistry gets really bad, there's a possibility for alchemy. So that part of it is maybe it's very difficult. But what did O-sensei tell Sadaharu? He told those coaches, teach him to wait. Too busy out there trying to hit the ball, so he has a hitch. Put him on one leg, let him find his center, and boom. He doesn't have to go out there. It's coming to him, boom. And so for O, that feeling of contact and that swing and that unorthodox stance, that was probably a form of heaven, a perfection. And O-sensei, even though, you know, he didn't never put a gi on, was kind of one of his celestial parents, one of his guardian deity coaches. Wait, O-san. Okay? So they're all out there. There are still teachers. Sometimes you have to go into history to find them. Sometimes you find them in popular fiction. The archetypes. So if we're able to come from this more original place, we can do almost anything. I would like to think, and this is of course a statement that Rudland made, we can survive anything. So that's more sitting style. Feeling your body is a little bit like feeling your connection to things. I'm too caught up in my ideas. I'm too caught up in the news feed. When you're kind of sitting quietly this way, you're getting your news feed from the universe. Ideally, after a while, we start to create the news. So it echoes. And, you know, if you're reading what's going on in the world, yeah, you've got to stay informed these days. But there should be maybe an equal time what Sensei called the Shinkan Kishin, calming the spirit, returning to one's own more original divine nature as that child between those forces. Or in his case, possibly, that place where the child becomes the true parent. Always parents, but that which was before. And so as we are training in Aikido, we are aspiring to put that lesson in our bodies and our souls. Fancy, body fine. But as Sensei said, everybody's got a body to train and a spirit to polish. And spirit, soul, they're more of us in that original place. So there's that going on at all times, but there's also this still. We are the universe is the body, the mother. There's a heartbeat. And the news creates all this anxiety and but and that becomes a reality. It's not just, okay, no, what's he talking about? You are in the sense, moment, feel of it. That becomes your, in those senses, words, your nin. And you trust the original design or mind of creation. And at this level, the body of creation becomes like a loving parent. I know that I was present at my daughter's birth. We, her mom and I, we did a home birth, and that was actually at the dojo on 6th Street in Japantown. We had a couple of midwives. We had a doctor lined up in case something drastic happened, but nothing happened. And she came out, I think, at 3:45 on November 8th of 1978. And guess what? I caught her. I was, she was in constant contact with her mom because she came out of her mom, right? But I was the very first contact she had. And, can remember the shirt. It was kind of a, it was a t-shirt. And it had stripes and it was brown, black stripes. And put her here. And her first instinct was to nurse. So, this nipple, though obviously it was not her mom. She found that, started to try to nurse, and then of course gave her to her mom. But that's creation. And there were a lot of things I couldn't give her because I was an Aikido teacher. She actually grew up in an Aikido school pretty much for the first 9 years. Hopefully there was that love she felt. And I'm a grandfather now, and I know that there's that love that my granddaughter feels. So it's generational. And the thing, if anything's going to save the world, talk about the alchemy, it's when people are, all of us are able to see past our differences and realize that love is a reality. It binds us all. We all come out of that original source or that original attraction between those parent forces. And we also, as we begin our journey back from I to more true nature, we are in that and of that love. That's Aikido's message. And we can get sidetracked in stretching and the ritual and a lot of the fun things like the training, and seeing your friends and everything like that, and that's all good. That's chemistry. Okay? Sometimes chemistry is good and sometimes chemistry goes awry. But that love is what brings the alchemy in. And so, that part of it is sometimes, it's a difficult one because we can kind of read Sensei's words, or we can read about the philosophy of Aikido, but, in my own particular sense, it all goes back to that. And that's really hard to sustain. It's really difficult to continually, especially in this world, making that or having that be brought out in the world of people. One of Sensei's major things is there's heaven, ten, chi, and there's jin, meaning people, humanity. And one of the things he said is, heaven and earth are actually already kind of perfect. They exist on very, very, very sound principles of harmony and beauty and truth. And there's jin, there's us, throwing the equation off. So basically, it's our mission in Aikido to discover ourselves in our original harmony, so that the heaven and the earth, the divine, the material, they kind of coalesce, and there's heaven on earth, Tengoku. And so today we kind of, just a day where, this is more of a reflective class. I like the movement, because the movement itself, when someone says move, yeah, I know it'll be fun doing the movements, but you make sure that the movement comes from that more original sense. You'll find your parents experience movement, even your celestial parents, water, fire, fire, water, it's a relationship. And as such, as we, as consciousness, live in that field, are affected by the movements of those forces. So at this level where jin or humanity or people, this can get pretty distorted. So my feeling is that Sensei created Aikido so that we would, through the training, get back more towards that original. And training here is done people to people, okay? There's a tendency to study it or find it in a class. But if you don't really have a feel for this, it's really difficult to get along, because everybody has good intentions, but oftentimes we clash. And so the actual sense of it oftentimes is just to keep down that road on that journey from where we are, which is here, in a world that's increasingly conflicted and divided. Separate from nature, and that separation more obvious every day. To ground, to soak in that original or some level of it. And then, of course, the movements, the movements start to naturally. There's an aliveness of beauty to creation. There's a power to creation. There's an intelligence to creation. There's a beauty, a purity, a harmony to creation. So, okay, so anyway, we're going to go into the other room and just maybe if you feel like it, we'll read some or we'll talk some. Oh. Okay. Yeah, so anyway, we had sort of a different thing today. So anybody with a sense or anything you'd like to add? Or
I just wanted to say, I don't know if it's of use, but I had the interesting experience on the space that I normally have for swinging the Joe, because it's long. I don't have a short one. It has a high ceiling, but it's usually I do that in the foyer of the house. And during the first part of your class, when you were talking about the mother and the father and the kids, all three of my kids were on lunch break, and my wife was helping, was actually feeding them so that I could take the class. But they were running through. I had to keep stopping, because they were running through the foyer. And so I was getting this like very literal interpretation on what you were saying, because I'd be like, okay, I'm stopping now so that I can do the minimum parent thing of not whacking my kid accidentally in the head.
Yeah, no, that's if you have a walking stick or an umbrella, sometimes we get so attached, to, okay, I gotta swing a stick or something like that. Almost anything,
Yeah, I've got a walking stick that's even longer than my chair.
Do you have like an extrema stick? Okay.
No, I got, I do have a cane, but it's got a big loop at one end, so I don't know that it would work for that kind of thing.
You get very creative.
Yeah. But usually it's not a problem. Usually the kids are like engaged during the lunch hour in some way that doesn't cause them to constantly cross the foyer, or I can usually use upstairs, but that only works until 12:40 when my older kids go back to their virtual classroom.
But you kind of find, I mean, this is sometimes it's an observation, is when that we're talking about is close, the world goes nuts. In your case, you're surrounded by all this love running around. You see what I mean? And,
literally.
Yeah, well, yeah, obviously, you know what I mean? And so it is tricky, a lot of times, and I know that I'm just like anybody else, nobody likes criticism, right? But I know that, this is kind of in the ancient history of this area. But there was a real senior teacher, who, there was another person around who was very political and very, Trumpian, let's just put it this way, okay? And so this teacher was in the spirit of Aikido, which is I'm going to love everybody, even people that think I'm total crap. I'm going to show people I can be friends with anybody. And so the more manipulative guy was sort of using this guy to consolidate his power because, oh yes, they get along. That's real Aikido. And what happened was there was such a power imbalance that there was kind of a revolution. And you would never believe it these days, but the ranking exams were totally done as an area. If you're going to take a black belt test, you had to sit with a board, and there was, believe it or not, and chances are, if you've been to board meetings and anything, you realize that everything is political. And it was kind of interesting to see this one guy forming this political bloc. And so what would happen is that, somebody from a school would take a test and fail. And then they would test again and they would pass. And you hear that all these people, they realized they had to go to this other guy's school, and then the guy would pass him because they would recognize his power. And so, it was like what it was. There was a kind of a very heated discussion, and it was decided to decentralize the testing, which is, basically at the time, the top rank in the area was a 5th degree black belt. If you had a 5th, you could run a black belt test. If you had 2/4, you could run a black belt test. If you had 3 third dans, you could do a black belt test. And so the testing became more decentralized as opposed to this spectacle, where of course all the politics was played out in a very, very underground way. And that part of it, what happened is the guy who was really trying to make everything right by being nice to this guy and being somewhat used by him, we started having instructors meetings. And what was interesting was the guy that was the real manipulator, he kept his mouth shut. And the guy that was being used by him, okay, but I don't want to mention names. Somebody might have a sense for it if you've been around long enough. Mouthed off. He was representing, unfortunately, even though, his personal dynamic, we all love one another. See, so-and-so and I, we love one another, that sort of stuff, And what was really interesting was that guy got up there, and it was almost like somebody being led to a slaughter. Because he said exactly the wrong things for the room. He really talks about the hierarchy of Japan and how we must defend that and how it was like the military and ... And one of the younger instructors, who was a woman, stood up and she said, I did not join Aikido to join the military. And what happened is the whole room turned on that guy. And basically, what he was probably saying was what that other guy, and because it pumped into him and pumped him up, so he would go out there and mouth off and take the fall. People that are sociopathic use institutions to get their own agenda, and they always set somebody else up to take the fall. And so what happens there is you get so twisted. You get, when you start to work the whole thing with people, that's why Aikido, in some sense, is very advanced. And I might argue, that the message of it can be done, outwardly. Oh, we get along. But that was really funny. That was a real lesson to me. That, okay, if you make it the outer thing, and there's an interior imbalance, and what happens is this guy was just like devastated. And so I was talking to Robert Nadeau, because we were both at that meeting. So he goes up to this guy and say, listen, so-and-so, you got to realize those people were not attacking you. There was a lot of energy building here before all this stuff got rearranged, and energy always moves. And so, at this particular point, when you stood up and said A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it moved towards you. Now, do those people hate you? No. But you became the vehicle, the target for that energy. And I was thinking, yeah, he got set up really, really badly. And so, what happens in structures a lot of times is that, you want to win. And a certain sort of person, especially the sociopathic types, they really want to win. And they're skillful. They know how to operate within those social structures. You see that quite a bit in the government, unfortunately. That's kind of why, unfortunately, there's got to be a pretty big misogi. And some of it I don't think is going to be pretty. Because there's a lot of unrest. This doesn't depend whether you're left or right of things. There's got to be some sort of respect of a center. And right now that doesn't exist in this country. And, this guy was well-meaning. I didn't particularly like the fact that somebody like that could be so easily manipulated. You see what I mean? There's a point where when you're kind of in a, you're in a social system, there are ideals. And then, you can get one person that feeds a certain element and it goes out of control. And sometimes those people are really smart. They know how to set you up. If he had gone out there and it was probably mostly with this guy who took the fall was saying the stuff the other guy was saying to him during their conversations, buddy to buddy. But he didn't take the fall. The other guy took the fall. And so sometimes it is tricky, we can be set up. That's why, the Aikido, for example, they were saying, that, okay, go back to that original place. But you sort of have to have the part of the journey. In other words, the parents give the child everything. And the child is a soul who's into the creation, the universe, to negotiate his or her own path through their own quote unquote divine mission or purpose. And there was a book once, Heinrich Zimmer wrote it, and he was one of Joseph Campbell's teachers. It was called The King and the Corpse. And the whole purpose of the book was good's interaction or first contact with evil. And usually what happens is, that journey is about the alchemy. Because at some point, evil hits, and you can be disillusioned, you can be destroyed, but in a series of myths, the hero or heroine is forced to go on a quest. They experience kind of the dark night of the soul, because everything that they bumped into appears to be a lie. That initial goodness or balance, all of a sudden, it's the evil mother or stepmother or stepfather thing. See what I mean? Comes in, and all of a sudden that original thing, ta-da. And so the book was really about how the quest complete is going back into the situation, but with much more balance. That you take the gifts and that original love, that original purity that you got from your parent forces, and you learn how to navigate here, which is a whole different game. And so, that book, I remember reading it, probably in the 70s, but it was, the book that it still goes back and forth inside my psyche a bit. That, it's basically good's contact with evil. And the lessons that are learned or not. And, it's interesting that don't think of good or evil. It's all about your journey and having that journey towards more what Jung's term is individuation. You're able to handle situations. You may have a bad week or a bad year or a bad decade, but you stay on course so the alchemy can happen. And that's really, I think, what the book is about. And if you get really disillusioned or defeated by the bad chemistry, you don't get to the alchemy. So, I mean, I don't know that a sensei would phrase it that way, but that would be my sense of it. So, yeah, a lot of times, right when you're close to it, the world goes nuts. I think it's always been that way. Gee whiz, if I had 2 more months here, I'd be enlightened, but gee, if I could just do this, I'd be enlightened, but you see what I mean? And that right there is that quest. You know, because we got to deal with the world and its pushes and pulls, but to also stay on course, right? That, you know, to me is what you would call the real Aikido, right? The real Aikido. Anybody with a thought or anything want to add? It's just, you know, there's a lot of stuff moving these days, so you know, you're giving a lot of matters some thought. So you know, we came up with whatever it was today.
I have a kind of basic question.
Sure.
The story that you told about the Bay Area sensei and the sociopath and all that.
Yeah.
I was wondering at the end of it how the Fall Guy's political ukemi was. Did he recover? Did Nado Sensei's talk help him? What happened? I'm really caught up in the story.
He did fine. The other guy eventually got some karma, his own karma back. We're not going to go into that because I'd have to name names. But yeah, the real sociopathic, psychopathic guy wound up taking a pretty major fall.
It's good to know that the system can work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, but I guess what it is a little bit is that, you know, a lot of times when you're looking at the obvious, you're missing something. All right. In other words, if you're going to go into a room and you're so pushed by certain energies that you're going to say exactly the wrong thing in that room and alienate everybody. Plus, you're also mouthing exactly the way you've been programmed to do that by this other guy. You see? There was that movie, I think it was Superman versus Batman, you know, more recent film. And, you know, Ben Affleck as Batman. My one problem with that film, I don't think Batman would ever be stupid enough to do Lex Luthor's dirty work for him. The real Batman, not him, you know, and Affleck was okay. But he's not going to do Lex Luthor's bidding or dirty work for him.
Certainly Adam West would never do that.
You like Adam West. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Adam West would never do that. He'd be too busy giving a speech at the PTA, you know.
Teaching kids how to use a crosswalk safely. This is important, people.
That's right. That's correct, you know. But, you know,
he wouldn't set up a death trap for Superman by dragging a truck tire across the room.
That's also true.
He would very much not do that, yes.
Yeah.
In my opinion, and it is my opinion, other people play Batman, but Adam West is Batman.
Okay, well, you know, for me, who is Batman? I would say, you know, given a choice between Christian Bale and Michael Keaton, I would still pick Michael Keaton, but that's just me.
Absolutely. Michael Keaton is the second best Batman.
Okay, all right. That's good. First, second, that's fine. Okay. But that part of it, you know, is like, you know, am I being, you know, it's crazy. Especially political structures. Am I being set up? And, you know, then it becomes a crazy chess match to win. But sometimes, you know, what it really is we all are playing roles in something. But who wrote the script? And at some point, you know, I think what Osensei found was, okay, that more divine level of me is scripting everything and directing it and producing it. And this is my product. It's called Aikido. And, you know, as I kind of found out, it's like there's a lot of real human interaction and imperfection in the art. And sometimes you'd be faced with a tremendous amount of turmoil, dealing with the politics. And so, you know, if life was just so simple as telling people to buckle up their seatbelts or use a crosswalk when you're crossing the road, yeah, that's a good world, right? And what happens is that world got folded in a couple of times and a couple of pretty nice twists got added to it. So, you know, what happens is all of a sudden the world of Adam West is the world of Bruce Wayne's parents walking into an alleyway and meeting, you know, the gunman. Right. And I know that, I think it was, for me, the worst film, but it was Batman and Robin. And Alfred Pennyworth, you know, played by Michael Gough. You know, I think it was Michael Caine talking to Christian Bale. I said, well, what is Batman? You've done a lot of good. But why did you become Batman? Saw your parents on the ground. You become Batman and you saved a lot of people, done a lot of good. Don't believe this chatter in your head that's being planted there by people that want to destroy you. But Batman exists because it's your expression of how to defeat death. When you're Batman, you're out there saving people, acting, but you couldn't do when you watched your parents die as a very young boy. So Batman is kind of your therapy. And you're a person, so yeah, you're going to make mistakes. But the real Batman would not be used, you know, by Lex Luthor. You'd see through that like that. He might not like Superman. That's one of the things about that. You know, Superman kind of, you know, is almost like an unattainable, right? And then you got Batman, who's human. And yeah, he uses methods which to some degree are, they're not legal. And so, you know, I mean, that's part of the fun.
To be clear about that, yes.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Batman bends the rules, but he also has a moral code. You know what I mean? There's a certain area where he doesn't carry a gun. You know, he doesn't kill people, right? And, you know, that's a fiction. I mean, you never would be Batman that way, but that area right there where the interactions, you know, between Superman and Batman have always been kind of one of the more fascinating things. And you know, what happened in that crazy film was they totally botched it. The only good part of that movie was Wonder Woman.
I think that's the only reason people saw it. It was like 5 minutes of Wonder Woman.
In fact, that whole film was really, instead of kicking things off, it just launched her, which was good. Yeah. But I mean, literally, I mean, she was the only one that really was anyone close to the way she was supposed to be. I mean, you know, Henry Cavill was okay. You know, I actually like him. Ben Affleck, he was okay too, but you know, when you got properties like that, you can't be satisfied with okay. But you know, there are decisions made at a studio level. You have the original purity of the characters, and you fall in love with the comics, and then you go to that movie, you go, then Justice League comes out, and you go, oh.
The problem with Batman versus Superman wasn't the actors; it was the script.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, I mean, you're only as good as the material. You know, occasionally you get something. I mean, Bruce Lee, for example, The Green Hornet was awful. I mean, I bought the whole set of it, you know, on DVD form, and I watched it and realized I was watching a horrible 26 minutes of TV just to watch about 35 to 40 seconds of Bruce Lee doing Kung Fu. It was very stark. I thought, this is awful, right? But he was great. And so, you go, wow, this is somebody who was so good, he elevated that whole thing way past where it should have been. And in a sense, martial arts are martial arts. I mean, what Shiba did was, instead of an advanced course in chemistry, he discovered alchemy. And, you could argue that Aikido in a certain way is like the Green Hornet without Bruce Lee. But you put Bruce Lee in it, and all of a sudden it's like, kerpow. Wow, who's that guy? And I think Abo Sensei is kind of that way. And there are other really good people too, so I'm not saying that it was exclusively him. But, to be able to take the material, I mean, one time Nado Sensei gets up and he's talking about, the Aikido technique, and he looks around at people and says, people, this is jujitsu. This is just jujitsu at the level of the techniques. You want to do jujitsu? They do it better than we do. So what else is going on? I thought that was, it, and, it was kind of a scathing thing, right? This is a horrible TV show with a guy who shoots people with a gas gun and has an electric sting because he can't do anything. And, it's the other guy. That's the only reason we watch. Green Hornet is a loser. Kato's fantastic,
But he's a rich loser.
Well, what was that line in Justice League? The Flash says to Bruce Wayne, what's your superpower? And Ben Affleck says, I'm rich.
Exactly.
That is a superpower. It is a superpower. Yeah.
I think Green Hornet's a more realistic version of a rich guy who wants to fight crime.
Yeah.
I know, I'll hire somebody to do the fighting for me.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that recent film was really, I mean, I liked it. I even watched it recently, I think on Netflix, is that, there's Kato, right? And so Kato is not just a martial artist, he also is kind of like, he can create things, right? So he gives a gas gun and a sting to whatever his name is, who played the Green Hornet. And so the Green Hornet says, why are you giving me this? And Kato says, one, you can't fight. Two, I don't trust you with a gun, so here. I thought, well, that's about it, right? That is about it, So, okay, so you get a gas gun and a hornet's sting, and that's about all you're going to get. I don't trust
That
you.
way, if you accidentally shoot me, I won't be dead.
That's right. And then what happens, he takes them and he shoots them with a gas gun and puts them out for 2 days. Anyway, it looks like you got other stuff to do, so maybe we should call it for today. But,
No, that was fine. She was just letting me know something about iPad charging.
Oh, okay. Anybody else with a statement about it? Because, that actual part of the message, I think, sometimes, I mean, there's that whole thing about, there is, like El Sensei said, don't call things good and evil. He didn't say there wasn't evil. You see what I mean? And what you do is you use the evil to continue on your path. It's part of being able to handle things, is handling the evil part, which is sometimes it's a real tough one. I mean, the guy that I was talking about, he and I were close once, and I just couldn't be with him when I could see him be so obviously just taken over by this other guy. I couldn't handle the politics of that. Of course, there's always politics. So, at some point, to actually go forward, you basically are going to run into that. Or, everybody's got a light and dark, and somebody, you look at and all of a sudden you find out they're ABC, okay? But does that mean you cut them off? No, you just have to learn how to navigate them, EFG. And then, you work the differences out. I mean, part of, the political stuff that's so bad right now, it's all about when, and what happens there is that, basically nothing's getting done. So, you can get so into winning that you freeze everything. And I think those sense it's contingents. If you call something good and evil, you've categorized it and you're stuck. And yes, there is evil. And yes, sometimes we have areas of the vase and we need to deal with it. And sometimes the evil is just the off balance in the person that you're trying to do a project with. Yeah. So it's a bit crazy. But, no sensei's thing. I just wish, I could just look at somebody in Ki and all of a sudden they're gone, I don't have that sort of power. So, I'm kind of in that where I gotta try to work it out somewhat. But that part of it, it gets where, the Aikido is really funny because, it comes out of Osensei's enlightenment. And then we're here trying to make it work in a world which, oftentimes is just really hard. But again, what we said at the beginning of this is oftentimes alchemy shows when the chemistry goes bad. You're not going to solve it with chemistry, but there's always an opportunity there. If in Don Juan's terms, we're flexible and fluid enough to seize the cubic centimeter of chance. So anyway, I think we're kind of done for today. So thank you. Okay, I'm gonna leave. You guys can stay around and wrap if you like. So I'm gonna.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay.
Audrey also sent a text thanking you and saying it was a powerful class.
Okay. Yeah. It was some stuff that had been sort of welling up inside. So, it was maybe a little different than we normally do. Yeah. Okay. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So if you can turn off the record.